Some stories begin with a spark you never see coming, a quiet moment, a soft breath, a stranger who notices the pain everyone else ignores. Tonight, you'll hear how a maid who's forgotten what kindness feels like meets a delivery guy who sees her in a way no one ever has. Welcome back to Mr. David Stories, where every heartbeat matters. And before we slip into this moment together, tap subscribe, like this video, and send your hypes. It's the lifeline that keeps these love stories breathing, and all it takes is a gentle flick of your finger. Now, settle in, take a breath, and let's begin. The delivery van rolled up to the mansion's side gate just as the morning sun cut through the high walls. Adrian killed the engine and sat still for a moment, fingers resting on the steering wheel. The uniform felt strange on him, too simple, too quiet, but it gave him something he hadn't felt in years: anonymity. No one looked twice at a delivery guy. That was the point. He stepped out of the van and adjusted the cap low over his forehead, making his way toward the service entrance where staff usually received packages. Before he could knock, he heard soft footsteps. Light, careful, almost rehearsed. He paused. A young black maid stepped out of the doorway with a basket of folded linens in her arms. Her movements were gentle, quiet, almost too quiet. Her shoulders bent slightly forward, as if she was used to making herself small. She didn't see him. She was focused on not dropping anything, on not making noise, on not drawing attention. Adrian froze where he stood. It wasn't her beauty that caught him first, it was the silence around her. A silence that didn't feel peaceful. It felt practiced, controlled, like she'd learned somehow that staying quiet kept her safe. She walked toward the clothesline, placing the basket down and stretching out a sheet. The morning breeze lifted it slightly, brushing her cheek. She didn't smile. She didn't even blink long enough to enjoy the air. She just worked, efficient, careful, tired. Adrian's chest tightened in a way he couldn't explain. He had seen countless people in his life: actors, heirs, investors, liars. But he'd never seen someone who carried exhaustion like it was stitched into her skin. She hung the next sheet. Her hand trembled for half a second, barely noticeable, but he noticed. Something was wrong here, deeply wrong. A voice snapped from inside the house, sharp, irritated, dripping with entitlement. "Why are you still out there? I told you the dining room must be spotless before noon." She flinched, not visibly, not dramatically, just enough for someone observant to feel it. Adrian's jaw tightened. She whispered a small apology, to the air, not to the person, then hurried back inside, leaving the basket behind. She didn't even glance at the delivery van parked just meters away. She didn't see him. She didn't notice the man who had been watching her carefully, quietly. He stepped closer to the doorway she disappeared into, hearing muffled footsteps and the faint sound of someone being spoken to in a tone that didn't belong in a home, more like a command in a place without mercy. Adrian exhaled slowly. This wasn't what he expected when he decided to go undercover. He thought he'd see arrogance, maybe selfishness, but he didn't expect to feel something twist inside him at the sight of a girl working like she was afraid to breathe too loudly. He took the package from the van and approached the door properly this time. His voice was calm, warm, the kind of tone he rarely used in his real world. "Delivery," he said quietly. But inside his thoughts were already elsewhere. Who hurt her? And why did it bother him more than it should? The service door opened slowly, and Adrian found himself staring at a tall, irritated-looking butler who barely glanced at him. "What is it?" the man snapped. Adrian held up the small box. "Delivery for the household." The butler scoffed. "Just leave it. We're busy." He reached to grab the package, but Adrian didn't release it immediately. Not in a confrontational way, just enough to force the man to make eye contact. "I'll need a signature," Adrian said softly. The butler frowned loudly. It wasn't the request. It was the fact that a delivery boy had slowed his momentum. After a moment, he scribbled something on the electronic pad and yanked the box from Adrian's hands. Adrian kept a neutral expression. He was used to disrespect, but in a different way. People usually feared him or fake-smiled for his money. Being dismissed without thought, it felt almost refreshing. But then he heard her voice again. It was faint, coming from just behind the butler. "I already cleaned the dining room twice," she said, calm and steady, though her eyes stayed down. "They spilled juice again. I'm still working on it." The butler spun around. "And why is it taking so long? Do you want the lady of the house to complain again? Move faster." Adrian's attention snapped to her. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her apron, shoulders slightly curved inward, but her face stayed controlled, quiet, calm. Not a tear, not a word back. But her eyes held something heavy. She caught sight of Adrian then, not fully, just a small glance before she looked away. It was fast, polite, almost apologetic, like she was sorry he had witnessed her being spoken to like that. The butler shoved the door to close it, but a voice called from deeper inside. "Wait," a woman's voice said, sharp, cold, dripping with entitlement. The butler hesitated and pulled the door back open. A woman stepped into view. Pristine makeup, designer dress, hair so perfect it looked like it had been styled by a team. She folded her arms. "This is the third time this week," she said, eyes locked on the maid. "If you can't do something as simple as keep a room clean, tell me so I can replace you." Replace. The word landed like a slap. The maid kept her face still, but Adrian saw her swallow hard, the kind of swallow that holds back something she can't afford to let out. "I'll fix it, ma'am," she murmured. "No," the woman snapped. "You'll redo the entire room, from scratch. And don't touch the centerpiece again. You don't have the hands for delicate things." The butler snorted. Adrian clenched his jaw. He didn't move, didn't speak. His cover mattered. But something hot flickered under his skin. The maid briefly looked up. Not at the lady, not at the butler. She looked at him, just for a second, and in that second, Adrian saw the truth. She wasn't broken. She was surviving. The lady finally noticed him. Her expression shifted to polite annoyance. "Why is he still here?" "He needed a signature," the butler said. She waved a perfect hand dismissively. "Then let him leave. Delivery boys don't need to linger." Adrian gave a respectful nod, playing his part perfectly. "Yes, ma'am. Have a good day." He walked back toward the van, but in his mind the scene replayed again and again. The maid's quiet strength, the woman's cruelty, the butler's arrogance, the tremor in her hand, the look she gave him. Brief, tired, questioning. He wasn't here to get involved. He wasn't here to rescue anyone. But he wasn't leaving this mansion behind. Not after seeing that. Adrian shouldn't have returned that quickly. Not the next day. Not the same hour. Not with no scheduled delivery. But he found himself parking the van by the same side gate, tapping the steering wheel like he had something to deliver, when all he really had was an excuse to see her again. He grabbed an empty clipboard, slid out of the van, and headed toward the service entrance. He didn't even have to knock this time. Raised voices were already echoing from inside the house. He slowed his pace. The maid stepped out with a silver tray in her hands, moving carefully, too carefully. A thin line of spilled water ran down the edge of the tray, the kind of spill someone would yell about. Her eyes were slightly red, but she carried herself the same way she always did, calm on the outside, chaos stitched inside. She almost bumped into him. "Oh, sorry," she whispered, stepping back quickly. Her voice was soft, but it wasn't weak. It had a quiet steadiness that made him look directly at her. For the first time, she met his eyes properly. Not a glance, not a flinch, but a full moment, and she froze. He wasn't smiling, but the warmth in his gaze made her blink like she wasn't used to someone looking at her with anything other than impatience. I didn't know there was another delivery today," she murmured. "There isn't," he said before he could stop himself. She frowned gently. "Then why are you—" A harsh voice sliced through the moment. "You spilled water on the table again?" The lady of the house snapped from behind her. "Are you trying to ruin the finish? Do you think furniture grows on trees?" The maid lowered her eyes. "It was an accident, ma'am." "Everything is an accident with you. Fix it before guests arrive." The lady didn't wait for a response. She turned sharply and disappeared deeper inside, heels clicking like a warning. The maid let out a small breath, the kind that escapes when someone is holding too much inside. She shifted the tray, preparing to go back in. Adrian stepped closer, lowering his voice so no one but her could hear. "Are you all right?" She stiffened at the question. People in that house didn't ask her that. People in her life probably didn't either. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her eyes said otherwise. She moved past him, but her foot caught on the uneven stone near the doorway. The tray tilted dangerously. Adrian reacted without thinking. He reached out, steadying it and her wrist at the same time. The moment froze. Her breath hitched. He let go slowly. She pulled her hand back quickly, like she wasn't used to being touched gently. "Careful," he murmured. "That could have fallen." She gave a weak, almost apologetic smile. Her lips didn't fully curl, but her eyes softened just a little. "Thank you," she said, a simple word, but it sounded like something she didn't get to say often, or receive often. She turned to go, but before she stepped inside, something slipped out of her mouth so quietly he almost missed it. "I wish they'd treat their guests the way they treat furniture." She hadn't meant to say it. It was a crack in her calm mask. But it was enough. Adrian felt something shift inside him, a thread pulling tight, pulling him closer to her world than he intended. He watched her disappear into the house again. He knew he should leave. Instead, he leaned against the van and said to himself in a low, quiet voice, "I'm not done here." Adrian stayed longer than he should have. He leaned against the van with the clipboard in his hand, pretending to check something while listening to the echo of footsteps, voices, and slammed doors inside the mansion. Delivery guys weren't supposed to linger, but nobody here paid attention to him anyway. They didn't look at staff. They barely looked at each other. Then he heard it. A low, tense argument coming from the side window near the dining room. Adrian stepped closer, careful with his footsteps, stopping just under the frame. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the words forced themselves into his ears. "You lost the checkbook again?" a man hissed. "I didn't lose anything," a woman snapped, the same cold voice from earlier. "Your sister probably took it." "She steals everything in this house," the man scoffed. "You're unbelievable. You know she wouldn't dare." "Oh, please," the woman cut in. "She's jealous. She can't stand that I'm in charge here now." "Just find it," he growled. "The guests are coming tonight. If it's missing, then blame the maid," the woman said without hesitation. "That's what she's here for." Adrian's brows tensed. Blame the maid, like she was a trash can for their mistakes, like guilt was something they threw at her on purpose. He clenched his jaw, but forced himself to stay calm. He needed to know more. Inside, footsteps approached. Adrian stepped back quickly, pretending to load empty crates from the van. The butler stepped out first, carrying 2 trash bags. He tossed them without care, then returned inside quickly. But just as Adrian started to lower the crate, she stepped outside, the maid. Her tray was empty now, and her shoulders were even lower than before. She pushed the door slightly closed behind her, taking a quiet moment alone on the small steps. She didn't cry. She didn't fold. She didn't crumble. She just breathed, a long, steady breath, like she was reminding herself to keep going. Adrian took a step closer, his voice low so he wouldn't startle her. "Tough morning?" She didn't jump this time. She must have sensed he was nearby. "It's always like this," she said quietly. "Some days worse than others." She looked at him, not directly, but enough to acknowledge his presence. "Do you ever get used to it?" he asked gently. She hesitated. Then she shook her head. "You don't get used to people like them. You just learn where to stand so you don't get crushed." The honesty hit him harder than any insult he'd ever taken in boardrooms. Before he could say anything else, the door behind her opened sharply. She straightened immediately, stepping aside like she'd been trained. It was the lady of the house. Her eyes pinned the maid first, then landed on him like he was dirt-tracked in from the street. "Oh, you're still here," she sneered. "Just finishing the delivery, ma'am," he replied politely. "Well, hurry," she said, waving a hand. "And you—" She turned to the maid. "The checkbook is missing. If it doesn't turn up in the next hour, you'll answer for it." Adrian's eyes flicked toward her. The maid blinked. "Ma'am, I haven't touched it." "And that is exactly what someone guilty would say," the lady said calmly, almost enjoying the fear she planted. "Find it." She went back inside. The maid stood frozen for a moment, then her shoulders sank. She looked at the ground. Adrian stepped forward. "Do you want me to help you look for it?" She shook her head quickly. "You shouldn't get involved. This isn't your world." But her voice trembled ever so slightly, not from fear of him, but from fear of what waited inside. She turned to go, but paused for a rare moment of vulnerability. "They'll blame me," she whispered. "Even if they find it." Something inside Adrian shifted. A firm, steady decision. Not pity, not sympathy, something deeper. "You're not alone," he said quietly. She lifted her eyes to him, confused, unsure whether to believe him. But before anything more could pass between them, the butler shouted from inside, "Maid, now!" She flinched, then hurried back inside. Adrian watched the door swing shut behind her. The mansion was full of secrets, but this wasn't just any secret. This was a setup. And for the first time since he put on the uniform, Adrian felt something new. He wasn't here by accident. He was here for her. By afternoon, the mansion had shifted into a tense rhythm. Staff moved faster, voices rose sharper, and the air carried a heaviness that told Adrian something dangerous was brewing. He lingered by the van again, pretending to reorganize packages he didn't have. He needed a reason to stay close. The front door swung open abruptly. 2 relatives of the family, a man and a woman, stepped out, whispering loudly enough for him to hear. "Are they seriously blaming her?" the woman hissed. "Of course they are," the man replied. "She's the easiest target, and she won't defend herself. She's too quiet. That girl needs to speak up. She won't, and they know it." They got into a sleek black car and drove off, leaving only silence behind. Adrian's stomach tightened. So it wasn't just cruelty, it was strategy. A deliberate decision to push blame downward to the weakest person in the house. He moved closer to the side entrance, hearing raised voices inside. The butler's tone was sharp. "You were the last one near the study. Why didn't you admit it?" "I wasn't near it," the maid said softly, her voice steady but strained. Too steady for someone innocent being cornered. Adrian stepped inside the service hallway just enough to see without being seen. The maid stood alone in the center of the room, hands clasped, back straight. The butler circled her like a vulture. "You think you're clever," he smirked. "Pretending to be quiet, pretending to be harmless." "I don't pretend," she whispered. "I only work." "Oh, you'll be working, all right," he snapped. "Working to explain why you're always around when things go missing." Her jaw tightened. It was the first true sign of frustration he'd seen from her. "I didn't take anything." "Then prove it," he barked. "How can she prove a negative?" Adrian muttered under his breath, too low for them to hear. The butler leaned closer to her. "Until you find the checkbook, the lady wants you kept away from the main rooms. You'll scrub the laundry area until further notice." Her breath hitched. Not at the punishment. She was used to unfair treatment. But at the isolation. Adrian could see it. She wasn't afraid of hard work. She was afraid of silence, the kind that brings thoughts she can't afford to have. The butler turned and walked off, leaving her standing alone in the wide hallway, small against the marble floor and towering walls. She closed her eyes for a moment, not crying, not breaking, just trying to breathe. Adrian stepped forward quietly. "You didn't do it," he said. She opened her eyes, startled that he was still there. "You heard all that?" "Hard not to." He shrugged lightly. "They weren't exactly whispering." She tried to smile, but her expression cracked halfway. "This is the third time they've blamed me for something I didn't touch." "Then why stay?" he asked softly. Her lips parted like she wanted to answer, but she looked away instead. "It's complicated." "Try me," he said. She hesitated, then whispered, "Because this job feeds my sister." Adrian's chest tightened. It explained everything, her silence, her endurance, her calmness under cruelty. She wasn't staying because she was weak. She was staying because she was responsible, the kind of responsibility that hurts. Before he could speak again, the lady of the house marched into the hallway, her heels striking the floor with irritation. "There you are," she snapped at the maid. "The guests will arrive tonight, if that checkbook doesn't appear." She left the sentence hanging, a threat disguised as expectation. Then her eyes landed on Adrian. "Why are you still here?" He offered a polite nod. "Just waiting for confirmation about a second delivery, ma'am." "Well, wait outside," she demanded. "You're cluttering the hallway, and make sure you don't talk to the staff unless spoken to." He gave a tight smile. "Yes, ma'am." The maid's eyes flickered with apology. Not for him, but because she lived in a world where this tone was normal. As Adrian stepped out, he felt something shift inside him again. Not anger, but purpose. He didn't come here to save someone, but he also wasn't going to watch someone get destroyed. Not on his watch. Evening settled over the mansion like a heavy curtain. Lights flickered on across the property, guests' cars lined the driveway, and the house buzzed with the exhausting energy of people trying to look perfect. Adrian parked the van farther back this time, half hidden under a shadowed tree. He didn't need to be close, he needed to be unseen. The checkbook scandal had grown teeth. Inside, the staff rushed around preparing for the dinner party. The butler barked orders while the lady of the house rehearsed her fake smile for guests. Somewhere in the mess, the maid worked quietly, folding napkins and adjusting table settings she wouldn't be allowed to eat from. Adrian stepped closer to the open window near the side corridor. He heard it. A gasp. Soft, shocked, and coming from the maid. Then the butler's voice, triumphant, too triumphant. "Well, well, well, look what I found." Adrian's heartbeat tightened. He moved closer. The butler stood in the staff storage room, holding the missing checkbook between two fingers like it was evidence from a crime scene. The maid stood across from him, her face pale, disbelief spreading slowly through her expression. "It was in your cleaning bucket," the butler said, smirking. "My bucket?" she whispered. I don't use that bucket for rooms, only hallways." "Exactly," he replied. "Plenty of opportunity to slip it in and accidentally misplace it." Her voice cracked. "I didn't touch it." "That's what guilty people say." Her eyes trembled, but she didn't cry. She held herself together with the same quiet strength Adrian had seen from the beginning. "This isn't right," she said softly. "And yet," the butler sneered, waving the checkbook, "here it is." Adrian clenched his fist. "No delivery guy would barge in. No billionaire undercover would reveal himself this early." But he could do something else. He stepped inside the open doorway, pretending to look lost. "Excuse me," Adrian said lightly. "I'm supposed to drop something off at the back pantry. Mind if I cut through?" The butler huffed. "This is staff business." "I figured," Adrian replied casually. "Just looked like a setup from where I was standing." The butler stiffened. The maid's eyes shot toward him, not in panic, but in shock. "What did you say?" the butler barked. "A setup," Adrian repeated calmly. "I've done deliveries to places like this for years. Seen missing items appear in people's things many times. It's always the quiet ones blamed first." The butler stepped forward, his chest puffed. "Are you calling me a liar?" "No," Adrian said softly. "I'm calling the situation suspicious." The butler's cheeks reddened. The maid looked at Adrian like he'd just stepped between her and a blow she'd grown used to receiving. "You've said enough," the butler hissed. "Leave." Adrian nodded. "Of course." But before he exited, he turned slightly toward the maid, subtle, gentle. "You deserve better," he whispered. She swallowed hard, something in her chest stirring. Not because he defended her, but because someone finally said what she'd never been allowed to believe. Adrian stepped out, heart pounding. He hadn't revealed anything, but he had shifted something. Inside the room, the maid stood still, staring at the checkbook in the butler's hand. Slowly, she whispered, "I know I didn't take it." The butler smirked. "You better pray the lady believes that." He walked off, leaving her alone, but not as alone as before, because outside the room, leaning against the wall with eyes narrowed, Adrian whispered to himself, "If they planted it once, they'll do worse." And for the first time, he felt something dark settle in his chest. He wasn't just observing anymore. He was getting pulled into her world, and he didn't want to leave. Night arrived with the kind of pressure wealthy homes create when strangers need to be impressed. Cars rolled up the long driveway, engines humming softly as guests stepped out, dressed in clothes worth more than most people's yearly salary. Inside the mansion, everything gleamed: chandeliers, polished floors, glasses lined like soldiers on the table. The place looked perfect, but beneath the shine, tension crawled. The maid moved quietly between rooms, placing cutlery, adjusting napkins. checking every detail twice, even though her hands trembled slightly. The false accusation still sat heavy on her chest. She walked past Adrian without seeing him. Or maybe she didn't expect him to still be there. He watched her closely, his jaw tightening at the exhaustion behind her calm face. The guests began to stream in. High heels clicked, deep voices echoed, fake laughter floated through the hall. The lady of the house swept into the center of the room, suddenly all charm. "Welcome, welcome. So glad you could join us." Her husband followed behind, playing the part of a gracious host. The maid kept her eyes down, serving drinks quietly, invisible unless someone wanted to scold her. Then it happened. A guest, a man with too much perfume and too little manners, snapped his fingers at her. "You?" he called. "Bring me another glass. This one has a stain." She looked at the glass. It didn't, but she nodded and reached for it. The moment she touched it, the man jerked his hand back and shouted loudly, "Watch it! You almost spilled that all over me." Everyone turned. She froze, eyes wide. She hadn't spilled anything. The man just wanted attention, or someone to embarrass. The lady of the house stepped forward instantly, hands on her hips, eyes burning. "Is it too much to ask you to be careful for one night?" she snapped. The maid tried to speak. "I didn't—" "Not another word," the woman hissed. "You've caused enough problems today. If you embarrass us again, I swear—" "She didn't do anything wrong." The entire room went silent. Heads turned. The lady blinked. "Excuse me?" Adrian stepped forward from near the doorway, still in his delivery uniform, cap low on his head. His tone was quiet, but steady enough to make people look at him instead of at her. "I was standing right here," he said. "She didn't spill anything. He moved his own hand." The rude guest scoffed. "Who are you to interrupt?" Adrian shrugged lightly. "Just someone who saw what happened." The lady of the house narrowed her eyes. "This is a private event. Delivery staff should leave after their job is done." Adrian met her stare evenly, but not with disrespect. "With all due respect, ma'am, blaming your staff for things they didn't do won't make the evening any better." A ripple went through the guests, subtle but noticeable. The maid's lips parted, eyes wide. She wasn't used to anyone defending her, especially not him. The lady forced a tight smile for the sake of the crowd. "We'll handle our staff. Thank you for your input." Adrian nodded. "Of course." But he didn't walk away. Not yet. As he stepped back, he caught the maid's eyes for a second. A small flicker of shock mixed with gratitude. A dangerous connection formed in that glance. Because this wasn't just a delivery guy protecting a maid. This was a man losing control of his disguise, and a girl finally seeing a small crack of kindness in a world that gave her none. The dinner dragged on for hours. Guests laughed, clinked glasses, told stories no one cared about, and pretended they admired the family hosting them. But eventually, as all performances do, the night came to an end. Engines faded down the driveway, doors closed, silence moved through the house like a slow breath. And then the real evening began. The maid gathered empty glasses quietly, stacking plates, wiping rings of spilled wine off the table before they dried. She worked the way she always did, calm, steady, invisible, until the lady of the house struck. The door to the dining room slammed shut, making the maid jump. "Do you think I'm stupid?" the lady hissed. The maid froze. "Ma'am?" "You embarrassed me tonight," she snapped, stepping closer. "In front of guests, in front of my husband, and worst of all, in front of a stranger." She meant Adrian. The maid swallowed. "I didn't try to embarrass anyone." You allowed a delivery boy to speak over me." The maid opened her mouth, then closed it. No matter what she said, it would be wrong. The lady stepped even closer. Her voice dropped to a sharp whisper. "You're here because I allow you to be. Remember that." Adrian, standing in the shadowed hallway, heard every word. He tightened his grip on the doorframe. She'd isolated the girl, waited until no guests were around, then struck where it hurt. The lady's voice sharpened. "And don't forget about the checkbook. Accidents happen. People disappear." The maid flinched, not from fear for her life, but fear of losing her job. "My sister depends on me," she whispered. "Then work harder." The lady spat. She turned, heels clicking as she left the room. The maid stood alone in the dim light, staring at the floor, like it held every answer she wished she had. Adrian wanted to walk in, say something, anything, but he stayed back. Timing mattered. Trust mattered. And he couldn't blow his cover yet. He stepped quietly toward another doorway to avoid being seen. That's when he heard voices again. Two guests who hadn't left yet were still near the foyer, whispering in low tones. "Did you notice the husband tonight?" one asked. "He seemed nervous." "Nervous?" the other replied. "He should be. He's been moving money again." Adrian paused. "Are you sure?" the first voice asked. "Positive. I have the bank file." "Does his wife know?" "No," the second guest said. "And when she finds out, that maid won't be the only one in trouble." Adrian's heartbeat slowed. So the checkbook wasn't about the maid at all. It was about hidden money, missing funds, a husband covering his tracks, a wife looking for someone to blame. The maid was collateral damage in a war she didn't even know existed. The two guests walked out the door, leaving the house in a heavier silence than before. Adrian looked back toward the dining room, where the maid was quietly clearing the last few plates. Her face was blank, but her eyes were tired in a way he'd never seen before. She wasn't breaking. She was fading. He stepped closer, keeping his voice soft so it didn't echo. "You don't deserve that." She turned, startled again, then softened when she saw it was him. "You shouldn't still be here," she said. "It's late." "I know." "People might think you're interfering." "I know." "Then why stay?" He looked at her for a long moment, because he wasn't just the delivery guy, because she wasn't just the maid, because something in her silence echoed inside him. But he couldn't say any of that, so he answered simply, "Because someone should." Her breath caught, just slightly. Not in romance, not yet, but in recognition. Someone had finally seen her. Someone had finally stayed. The house had quieted, but the kind of quiet that hides trouble under the floorboards, the kind that makes you feel something is about to crack. The maid finished wiping the long dining table. Her hands trembled slightly from the stress of the night, but she forced them steady. She'd become an expert at holding herself together when the world tried to tear her apart. She picked up the last plate just as a shadow appeared in the doorway. It wasn't the lady, it was her husband, the man everyone in the house tiptoed around. He stepped into the room with a glass of whiskey in hand, eyes unfocused but sharp enough to cut through silence. "You," he said. The maid straightened instantly. "Yes, sir?" He walked toward her slowly, swirling the drink. "Do you know what happens to people who cause problems in my house?" Her throat tightened, but she kept her voice calm. "I didn't mean to cause anything tonight." He took another step. "You embarrassed my wife. You embarrassed me. You embarrassed this family." It wasn't true, but truth didn't matter in houses like this. Before she could answer, he slammed the glass on the table beside her, making her flinch. Adrian saw everything from the hallway, His jaw clenched, his pulse spiked. But he didn't intervene yet, not until he understood the man's next move. The husband leaned in close, lowering his voice. "I know what you're doing," he whispered. The maid blinked. "Sir, I don't—" "You've been snooping," he said. "The checkbook, the missing cash. You think I don't see you watching things? Listening? Spying?" Her breath caught. "I'm not spying on anyone." "Oh, but you are," he murmured. "You're in places you shouldn't be. Hearing things you shouldn't hear. And if I find out you touched anything, I'll make sure you regret it." Her hands tightened around the plate. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but Adrian stepped forward. "Sir?" The husband whipped around, surprised to see a delivery guy he'd forgotten existed. "What?" he spat. "Are you still doing in my house?" Adrian adjusted his cap. "You forgot to sign the secondary form, sir. Company rules. I can't leave without it." It was a lie, but the perfect lie. The husband scowled. "Give it here." Adrian stepped closer, not enough to threaten, just enough to give the maid breathing room. He held out the clipboard. The husband signed violently, then shoved it back and turned to leave. But before he exited, he shot the maid a look that chilled the air. "This house has no space for thieves." She didn't respond. She couldn't. He left with heavy footsteps. The moment he was gone, she finally exhaled, shaky, quiet, and pained. Adrian saw the way her shoulders trembled, how she tightened her grip to hold herself steady. "You all right?" he asked softly. She blinked rapidly, trying to pull herself together before she let anyone see her break. "He thinks I'm spying on them. He thinks I'm stealing." "You're doing neither." "I know that," she whispered. "But in this house, truth doesn't protect me." Adrian lowered his voice. "What they're doing to you isn't right." She looked down. "It doesn't matter." "Yes," he said firmly. "It does." For the first time, her eyes lifted fully into his. No barriers, no mask, just raw exhaustion and the smallest spark of something like hope. Then, a sound. A soft click. Someone standing at the top of the staircase watching them. A silhouette, still, almost hidden. The maid's breath hitched. She recognized the shape. The lady's sister, known for stirring trouble. A woman who loved gossip more than truth. She stood there silently, eyes narrowed, watching the maid and the delivery guy alone in the dining room. Then she turned and vanished upstairs. The maid's voice dropped to a whisper. "She's going to twist this. She's going to tell them I was flirting with you." Adrian stepped closer, lowering his tone. "Let her talk." "You don't understand," she whispered, panic slipping through her calm exterior. "They won't question her. They'll punish me." He held her gaze, voice steady. "Then I'll make sure they can't." She stared at him like she didn't know whether to believe the stranger who kept standing between her and danger. But his warmth, his certainty, the way he looked at her like she mattered. For the first time that day, her breathing eased. Just a little. The lies spread faster than footsteps on marble. By morning, the atmosphere in the mansion had changed, sharp, cold, suspicious. Staff whispered among themselves, glancing at the maid with pity mixed with fear, as if standing too close to her would pull them into trouble. Adrian returned early, parking far enough not to be noticed, close enough to hear the tension before stepping inside. He found her in the laundry room, scrubbing a tablecloth that didn't need scrubbing. Her movements were mechanical, distant, like her mind wasn't in her body anymore. She heard him enter and stiffened. "You shouldn't be here today," she whispered. "Not after last night." "Why?" She hesitated, then turned slightly toward him. "They think she swallowed. "They think I was being inappropriate with you." Adrian felt something cold settle in his chest. "Inappropriate?" he repeated. She nodded, eyes down. "The sister told the lady she saw me flirting outrageously with a delivery guy. And since they already blame me for everything else—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Adrian stepped closer, not touching her, not crowding her, just close enough to speak softly. "It wasn't your fault. I know," she whispered. "But they don't care. They needed a reason to punish me, and now they have one." Before he could answer, footsteps echoed down the hallway, fast, loud, angry. The lady of the house stormed in. "There you are," she snapped. "Just where I expected you, hiding in here after embarrassing my family again." The maid's hands tightened around the cloth. "Ma'am, I didn't—" "Don't talk back," the lady barked, pointing an accusing finger. "You were seen acting improperly with a stranger in my house during my event." "That's not what happened," the maid said quietly, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Oh, please," the lady scoffed. "If you want attention from men, go look for it outside this house, not here." Adrian's jaw locked. The lady whirled toward him. "And you? Why are you even here again? Delivery boys don't need 2 trips a day." Adrian kept his voice calm. "I came to drop off receipts you forgot to sign." She laughed, loud, sharp, mocking. "Oh, look at this. The little maid and the delivery boy defending each other." The maid shook her head quickly, eyes wide. "Ma'am, it's not like that." But the lady wasn't listening. "You're done," she said. "After today, you're gone. I won't tolerate staff who create scenes and chase after men while on duty." The maid's breath stopped. Not a gasp, not a cry, just stopped. Her job, her sister, everything she'd been holding together, ripped away in 2 sentences. Adrian felt heat rising under his skin. He'd been patient, he'd observed, he'd kept his cover, but watching her crumble under a lie she didn't deserve, that tested something inside him he didn't know he still had. "Ma'am," he said carefully, still controlling his tone, "she didn't do anything wrong. You're punishing the wrong person." The lady turned with venom in her voice. "And who are you to tell me how to run my house?" Adrian looked at the maid. Her eyes flickered with panic, not for herself, but for him. "If you argue with them," she whispered, "they'll throw you out too." "I'm already leaving," he said softly, "but not without telling the truth." He faced the lady again. "I saw your guest last night," Adrian said. "He yelled at her over nothing. She didn't flirt. She didn't touch him. He lied. Your sister lied. This punishment isn't fair." The lady's face twisted with controlled rage. "You're done here," she said sharply. "Get out." "Gladly," he replied. She pointed at the maid. "And pack your things. You're finished." The maid blinked, slow, disbelieving. "Ma'am, please." "No. I won't have scandal in my house." Adrian stepped forward, voice low, steady. The warm shyness replaced with something colder. "Maybe the scandal isn't the maid." The lady froze for a second, just a second. Something in Adrian's tone pierced through her arrogance. Something in his eyes, a depth she didn't understand, made her step back ever so slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Leave," she hissed. "Both of you." Adrian walked out slowly. The maid followed behind him, shaking so subtly no one else would notice. But he did. Once they stepped outside into the cold air behind the mansion, she exhaled a breath she'd been holding all night. She finally whispered, "I don't know what to do." Adrian looked at her, really looked at her, and something inside him settled into a decision that would change everything. "You won't face this alone," he said quietly. She stared at him, confused, hopeful, afraid. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you helping me?" He hesitated, then gave the only answer that felt true. "Because some people deserve someone in their corner." Her lips parted slightly, not a smile, not yet, but a shift, a spark, a quiet, trembling relief, and as he watched her, something clicked in his chest. This wasn't about undercover work anymore. This wasn't just curiosity or empathy. This was personal, too personal. He turned away before she could see how much she affected him, because episode 1 needed to end with a single dangerous truth. Adrian had no idea how deep he was falling. And as this episode closes, remember, nothing in this mansion is what it seems. If you think the worst has passed, you're wrong. Episode 2 opens a door that can't be closed again. Don't miss it.